Thank you, Armin and Somaye, for your exceptional documentary. I welcome everyone to the 2025 Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Distinguished Lecture featuring our exceptional and inspiring colleague, Professor Persis Karim, the Director of Iranian Diaspora Studies Center at San Francisco State University. Ustad Karim, Chakarati. Professor Karim's lecture today is also the inaugural lecture of our new monthly seminar series devoted to Iranian diaspora studies. This initiative is a collaboration between the University of Toronto, San Francisco State University, and Oklahoma State University, and co-conveners of this seminar series are Professor Persis Karim and my distinguished colleague, Amy Malek of Oklahoma State University. I'm also grateful to Roshan Cultural Heritage Foundation, the Canadian Society for Iranian Studies, and the Iranian Studies Student Forum for sponsoring today's lecture. I would like to express our individual and collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates for thousands of years. It has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live, learn, and teach on their ancestral homeland. My colleague, Dr. Nusha Keizad, who successfully defended her dissertation in the Department of English last December, has graciously agreed to introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Karim, Dr. Keizad.
Hi, everyone. I want to start off by thanking you all for being here tonight, despite the weather, all the snow. And so sorry, Professor Karim, for this weather. California must feel so far away. I would like to now introduce our inaugural speaker, Professor Persis Karim, who is the director of the Center for Iranian Diaspora Studies at San Francisco State University, where she also teaches in the Department of Humanities and Comparative and World Literature. Since 1999, she has been actively working to expand the field of Iranian diaspora studies, beginning with the first anthology of Iranian writing she co-edited, A World Between, Poems, Short Stories, and Essays by Iranian Americans. She is the editor of two other anthologies of Iranian diaspora literature, Let Me Tell You Where I've Been, New Writing by Women in the Iranian Diaspora, and Tremors, New Fiction by Iranian American Writers. Before joining San Francisco State, she was a professor of English and Comparative Literature at San Jose State, where she was the founder and director of the Persian Studies Program and coordinator of the Middle East Studies minor. She has published numerous articles about Iranian diaspora literature and culture for academic publications, including Iranian Studies, Comparative Studies of South Asia, Asian, African, and Middle East Studies, and MALIS, Multi-Ethnic Literatures of the United States. The Dawn is Too Far, Stories of Iranian American Life, is her first film project, co-edited and co-produced with Sumaya Behrens. She received her master's in Middle East Studies and her Ph.D. in Comparative Literature from UT Austin. She is also a poet. Please join me in welcoming Professor Persis Karim.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with you from that neighboring country south of the border that is experiencing its own unique form of storm right now. And I can't use the expletive that goes before the word storm, but I'm very happy to be with you in Canada, a very beautiful, kind and gentle country. And the other day I was in the hotel lobby watching a hockey game between Canada and the US, and I found myself rooting for the Canadians. So that tells you something about my state of mind. It's such a pleasure to collaborate with the University of Toronto and with Dr. Tavakoli on this new speaker series. I can tell you that laboring for the last 25 years on Iranian diaspora studies sometimes has been a lonely enterprise, but I feel like I've now found my people in this field, and some of them are here in this room and working very hard to bring this field of study to greater visibility in Canada as well. And you're very lucky to have the University of Toronto and a really wonderful crew of people working at the Center for Iranian Studies. So thank you again for the honor of sharing my work with you today. I'm going to give a little bit of a preview to the film, but I'm really excited more than anything else to share the film with you because it's been a labor of love and it took almost 5 years to finish it. But I want to also give some context to my own process of thinking about the power of a medium like film by talking a little bit about the origin of this project in the capacity of being someone invested in storytelling. So I'll start by giving you a little bit of a kind of an overview of where I've come from and some of the things that I think are really essential for the future of this field. I also want you to think a little bit of this as a manifesto for the work that we all need to be doing to build a living archive. So I want to start by talking a little bit about what exactly is the Iranian diaspora. And it's a term that I think is newly arrived, but also open to interpretation, definition, and expansion. And many of you in this room are part of what I would consider the Iranian diaspora. I made a little graphic for you to think about. The idea of a reticulated Iranian diaspora means this idea that it's not fixed in time or place, but is more like a concentric set of circles where people move across borders, across continents, and they bring with them their culture, their stories, their memories, their histories, and they also create new stories and memories and histories. And so therefore, it's not a static enterprise, but one that's full of dynamism and possibility. And I wanted to sort of emphasize North America is not the center. It's just for the purposes of this talk, thinking about this continent, and I'm more familiar with the US, for example, but I think Canada and the US share many properties. And the idea that the diaspora moves back and forth. So what's happening here is also affecting what's happening in Iran, and what's happening in Iran is affecting us here, whether we're aware of it or not. Oops. I need my lovely technical assistant. Okay. So what we know thus far is that we think about diasporas in terms of numbers because that's how we have some accounting for who we are as a group of people. But the numbers are only now beginning to be reflective of the sort of reality. But I wanted to sort of point out some of the challenges for even using numbers. One is that, at least in the US, I would say the census is not a very active and accurate reflective of the amount of Iranian people. As many of you know, in the US, we had, in the last census, we had an opportunity to include MENA, the MENA category, Middle East and North African. Trump revoked that. There's been an effort since that last census to reinstitute these categories. Unfortunately, we have the same president that reneged on this from last time. So we're unlikely to have the category in the next census. However, as you can see from the numbers, it looks like a pretty paltry number, 200,000. I don't know what the number is, but I'm pretty sure it's way more than that. For Canada's last census. In the 2020 census, it was reported that there were 568,000 Iranian Americans, and many of us think it's much closer to 1 million or 2. But the reality is that Iranians have been immigrating to North America in somewhat significant numbers in the last 7 decades. More so, of course, as a result of the revolution in 1979. But I think even in Canada, you could say that even beyond 1979, more Iranians arrived in Canada than in the US because there have been a lot of restrictive immigration policies. They've also been leaving Iran in larger numbers because of events like the sanctions, the economic climate, political repression as a result of the Islamic Republic. And it's hard to gauge numbers when they are more like trickle-in migrations as opposed to mass migrations. But we're still trying to account for that major mass migration out of Iran in 1979 to approximately 1988. We simply do not have the data that we probably would like to have. If anybody's in a social science field, you know that numbers do speak a great deal. And they're important not just to know how many Iranians there are, they're also important for things like counting second generation and third generation. In the US, we use it to think about funding bases for different communities. So those are some of the challenges in trying to identify. I'm not sure what to do here. Okay. Oops. I'm going to sort of frame my talk today by talking about what an archive looks like or can look like. And I had the pleasure of visiting Dr. Tavakoli's archive along with his staff, and it was a treasure trove. I think you have to organize a private tour to go in there, but it's a wonderful model for me to think about too. However, I've been working on the digital frontier of archiving, and Dr. Tavakoli has amassed some incredible books, papers, newspapers, and they're in the midst of archiving them. And what archives can do is the heavy lift of narrating histories that are in danger of being lost. So oops, you know what, I skipped over a slide, and I'm gonna go back. Okay, sorry. I'm going to talk a little bit about what constitutes Iranian diaspora studies because it's important to thinking about the archival process. Unlike more traditional Iranian studies, which I would not accuse Dr. Tavakoli and his team of doing, Iranian diaspora studies takes a different lens. It's forward-looking. It's not looking back at Iran, but rather looking at where people end up, capturing and observing what might have been lost or overlooked, or that is underanalyzed from the past. Secondly, it's a study and analysis of the innovations, challenges, and opportunities within Iranian diaspora context. What's new? What are people making? How are people interpreting their histories? It's understanding the dynamics and influence of ongoing migration on existing communities, because we know when people are arriving, they're also introducing aspects of Iran and Iranian culture that may have not been part of these initial migrations. It's a response to representations, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Particularly for those of us from the US context, we've been struggling with the way in which the media represents us rather than us representing ourselves. And it begins with something like the hostage crisis, 9/11. Those are the kinds of representations that are prevalent in the US, and I'm sure they leak over across the border to Canada as well. It's understanding the political, economic, and cultural power within the societies where Iranians are living today. It's the dynamics between homeland and diaspora, which I think is often not accounted for enough. It's a response to global events, media headlines, and government tensions, i.e. between Iran and Canada or between Iran and the US, as well as regional tensions. It's religious, ethnic, and racial, as well as gender and sexuality identities that have been changed or in flux as a result of people's new identities and new communities in their diaspora contexts. It's also the myths and stories that Iranians tell about themselves, partly as an act of preservation, sometimes as self-delusion, sometimes to refute stereotypes that are being told about them. It's also the complex stories that are often unnarratable. They're difficult to narrate because they're tinged with pain or sorrow or loss. We need to know what form these stories are taking and can take, and we need to recognize where the silences, the omissions, and oversights are, and ultimately, what is new. And I love this idea of an archive that is suggestive of newness. Okay. Sorry. I'm having a communication breakdown. Okay. For my manifesto of a living archive, I borrow from the Turkish novelist Orhan Pamuk, who, if any of you have ever been to Istanbul on the non-European side, he has something called the Museum of Innocence, which is a fascinating space. He wrote the novel, The Museum of Innocence, and while he was writing it, he built an archive to accompany his novel. And it's an archive about the city of Istanbul and the particular history of when there was a coup in the I don't know exactly what year, but it's telling the story of Istanbul as a place, but the people of Istanbul. And he has a manifesto inside the entryway to that museum, and I saw it in 2014, and I said, I'm going to steal this. I've only given you 3 points that I think are germane to my conversation today. And it's about, he's refuting the idea of museums, and I use the word archives interchangeably, that large national museums, such as the Louvre and the Hermitage, took shape and turned into essential tourist destinations alongside the opening of royal and imperial palaces to the public. This idea of power, space and power. And he says, this is unfortunate because the stories of individual are much better suited to displaying the depths of humanity. So it's a kind of refutation of power, states, and the idea that the archive resides only in these physical places represented by state power. The 7th point he raises is the aim of the present and future museums, and here I use the word archives, must not represent the state, but to recreate the world of single human beings, the same human beings who have labored under ruthless oppression for hundreds of years. This seems to me a valuable critique of how state power omits the stories of those who've been either vanquished, disappeared, killed, genocided, whatever, and the necessity to bring them back into these archives. And then finally, the idea that the future of museums or archives lies inside our homes, meaning it's in the stories that we carry in our migrations and in our memories that are valuable to telling a bigger story. And in this case, the story of Iran, the story of Iranian diaspora, and the ways in which we all got here, whether we're born in Iran or born outside. I'm just going to go to this. This is an image from the Museum of Innocence, which I just wanted to show you. It's a beautiful, small little museum. He went to flea markets. He asked his friends for materials. So it includes everything from photographs and shoes and bags. The point is, this was a fictional novel, but he believed that the fiction of his narrative was reflective of a particular moment in history. So that blurring of fiction and truth, I think, is one that's also apt for our purposes. I'm going to begin with a little anecdote about my own father. On the photo on the right there, my father is the one with the short, not wearing a hat, and he has a little jacket with a fur collar. My father was born in Paris in 1915. His father and mother went to Paris after they met a Scotsman in Tehran who was interested in importing textiles from Iran, rugs, silks. And my grandfather, who's long deceased, was a tailor, and he decided to move with his young wife to Paris. My father was born in France in 1915. He lived through the First World War, and eventually his family went back to Iran after the First World War ended and France's economy was in free-fall collapse all over Europe. But it was part of his journey as a migrant, and I bring this story in not so much to be sentimental, because I just realized as I was putting this slideshow together, my father died 20 years ago this month, but more so to suggest that the traces of where our families come from or where we come from live with us long after the actual departure from those places. My father was born in France. He eventually ended up back in Iran. He went to school. He was educated in Iran, but then later migrated to the West. And this photo is from him in New York. And I love the juxtaposition of these two photos. His father with a very similar brimmed hat, and my father in New York with the Chrysler building behind him when he arrived here in 1946. There was a lot between that, and this is a picture of my father on the right with the coattails. He was one of the early graduates of the University of Tehran. I think he graduated in 1934, and he was quickly promoted in the Iranian National Railroads. He was a civil engineer, and he worked on the expansion of the Iranian National Railroads when Iran was occupied by the Soviets in the north and the British in the south. I only got this photograph as he was entering his twilight years. He said, "Oh, maybe you'd like this photograph. I'm a little bit embarrassed by it. I never wanted to show it." And he had quite a large one, black and white, really nicely printed, because he didn't really like the Shah. And he didn't just disliked him. He thought he was full of himself, and he came back to Iran when his father was deposed. And my father was very, I think, ahead of his time, thinking about the political life of Iran in the midst of the discovery of oil and the occupation. But I thought it was interesting that he had this photograph and only shared it with me very late in his life, after he understood how fascinated I was with Iranian history. He died in 2005, and right before he died, I contacted his older brother who was in Iran, and his name was Georges, and he wrote a letter. We talked on the phone, and he wrote a letter to me, and he wrote one to my father. He was aware that my father had had a stroke, and there was a likelihood he wasn't going to live. But I was really struck by the letter when it finally came to me in the hands of a friend who had been in Iran, and she paid a visit to my uncle on my behalf to give him the news that my father had died. And he wrote this letter, and this is a translation. It was in Persian, and you can read as much as you want. But the part that I thought was so interesting was the part in yellow where, 50 plus years after the Mossadegh was deposed, my uncle was writing about the events in a kind of final letter to my father. He narrates their childhood together in Paris. They played Rustam and Alexander the Great, and they did sword fighting. But this particular paragraph about the Shah, about paying a visit to a family that had lost their son to the regime, and the idea of their generation being very almost feeling gypped and cheated of a chance at a democratic future because of the overthrow of Mossadegh. The letter was so beautifully written. He never signed it. It was simply, and then he wrote this list of 4 things, different kinds of courage. It was such a glimpse into a big history in 2 men's lives who were brothers, who were separated by a long distance of time and space. They hadn't seen each other since 1978, I think, was the last time they had seen each other. But it became, to me, part of this idea of a living archive, that people's letters, ephemera, stories are really essential to understanding the mentality of a particular generation. And I know Dr. Tavakkoli has many similar kinds of things in his possession, letters from people who are telling these histories in ways that I think are sometimes not possible in books and in the kind of research. When the first collection that I did came out in 1999, I had given my father a copy of this book, A World Between. It was a collection of the first anthology of writing by Iranian Americans. And my father looked it over. He gave it back to me. He said, "You forgot something." And so that's his marginalia in the book. I signed it to him, he read it, and then he gave it back to me, and he said, "I want you to see what I wrote in the margin." And it was, again, a kind of moment in which I realized I was approaching things not from the point of view of somebody who lived through these historical events, but mostly through these sort of academic enterprise of, doing literary study. But for me, this is part of the archive of my father's collection. And it's important to me because in some ways it's the interactive part of archives. I want to say a little bit about the context of thinking about what the living archive can do and the places where it is enriched by different kinds of storytelling and different responses. So this is just a graphic that I toyed with a few years ago, thinking about the space between when people come to a place, they have to deal with these big social questions. Who am I? Who am I relative to where I ended up? How do I represent myself and how am I being represented? How do I identify myself? And ultimately, how do I mobilize my social, cultural capital to become something in this new space? And somewhere in the middle of all those processes is that space of the living archive, what people say about themselves versus now versus their past. So I think about it as a kind of set of concentric circles. There's no linear trajectory. It's the generative space of trying to figure out who you are and how you belong. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this without somebody helping me, but I'll narrate this part. In 2021, thankfully you don't have to deal with this in Canada, Lindsey Graham, who's a senator from South Carolina, was on television because he decided to do the 23andMe genetic test. And he said on this Fox News show, "I'm waiting for my results. Hopefully I'm not going to be Iranian." Or, yeah, hopefully I won't be Iranian. That would be terrible. And it was such a painful and sharp reminder of that, the fact that we in the US are still dealing with the legacy of the hostage crisis and with this kind of constant purveying of a negative image of Iranians. But I thought of it as a really important way to sort of understand, like, when you're under this microscope and when your image is managed by a certain set of frames, in a way you respond to those frames over and over again, and you can never get out of it. So I use this as a negative example of what sometimes makes positive things, generate positive things for an archive.
Poking fun at Senator Elizabeth Warren's DNA test is getting a lot of mileage. Even Republican Senator Lindsey Graham is joking about it. On Fox and Friends this week, Graham announced he is getting a test of his own DNA, and he joked it might determine if he is Iranian. And then he laughed and said something that is angering a lot of Iranian Americans. So if you missed it, here he was.
Come back in a couple of weeks and we'll take a look.
We'll find out who you really are.
I'll probably be Iranian. That'd be like terrible.
Oh, they're great people, just bad leaders.
Yeah, bad leaders.
Not everyone was laughing. Social media lit up. Like this tweet: "Both of my parents migrated to the U.S. from Iran, along with much of my family. What's wrong with having a Persian ancestry?" This comment from Graham and the casual way in which he delivers it and then laughs is really off-putting. That is from Oliver Darcy here at CNN, our senior media writer, and that was retweeted like 7,000 plus times, and this is personal for you.
Yeah, I just thought the comment was extremely distasteful. Both my parents, like I said, migrated from Iran to the United States. Much of my family migrated from Iran to the United States. And I know a lot of Persians. I'm part of the Persian community, and I know a lot of Persians, particularly back home in California. And when I saw this, I thought it was just extremely off-putting from Senator Graham, just distasteful. And I understand that it might have meant as a joke. I think that's what his office is saying. It was mostly a joke, but it came across.
You weren't laughing.
No, I wasn't laughing, and I don't think it was really funny.
And when Senator Graham's office did directly get back to you, they said it was a joke. Mm-hmm. What else did they say?
Well, they pointed me to his comments last night on Fox News. And on Fox News, Graham went on there and he said, yes, this was a joke. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm a big ally of the actual Iranian people in Iran, but he's a strong critic of the current government, the regime, the religious regime there. And that's an understandable position. I think a lot of Iranians are actually, Iranians in the U.S. are critics of the current Iranian.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm a little slow on the technology. Okay, so you see the point here. This is, in some ways, this is the narrative that we exist in, and it's only likely to get worse. So I wanted to sort of frame this idea of how we tell stories and how we build an archive through some of these different modes. So these are a kind of list of things to be thinking about: history and historical trauma, rupture and narrative urgency, stories of migration, representing oneself against representations by others, stories of migration, arrival and adjustment, representing oneself against representations by others. And this very interesting use of a guy in 2021 who's using the word Persian when I thought we were back to Iran, but you see how that slippage happens. And then thinking a little bit about genres and nonlinear and non-homogeneous representations in the actual archive that we try to create. At the bottom here, I put this idea of Tehrangeles and Toronto because I knew that my colleagues from Toronto Metropolitan University are working on a project called Toronto. And this idea that how we build spaces around a sense of belonging and cultural familiarity is really important to building this idea of the archive. And I hope that they'll be sharing their work soon. I'm going to skip ahead because I'm mindful of the time. I just wanted to share with you a couple anecdotes from writing that was submitted to me when I was doing anthologies that have stayed with me for a long time. This is a poem about the Iran-Iraq War. We have so much work to do about the Iran-Iraq War. Many people lived through it. Many people have memories of it, whether they were children or adults. But it's an important thing to reckon with those histories, even how painful they are, because they are part of the history of Iranians living in the diaspora. And also, they're in danger of being lost. This is another poem that now a very famous poet named Solmaz Sharif submitted to me when she was 13 years old. And I published it, and it still haunts me. It's a poem about seeing her father's shoes that traveled with her from Iran. And also to emphasize, I went to the shoe museum today, by the way, the idea that even objects like footwear, shoes, can tell a story. So I hope that that gives you some ideas for the archive that even exists in your own homes. One of the things that has happened in a place like Los Angeles is that we had a burgeoning of spaces dedicated to Iranian culture, history, intellectual endeavors, books. And this bookstore, Kitab Corporation bookstore, has now since closed. And we didn't, unfortunately, there hasn't been much in the way of doing archival work on spaces like that. But it's really important to understand that these are histories that are being made now, and we need to document them. I'm also really mindful of the digital spaces we now live in, that we don't just live in physical spaces, we live in the ether of the internet, Instagram, Facebook. So on the left, I have a picture of a store, a Bastani ice cream store in Los Angeles, and an image of the longest night, Shab Yalda, in Toronto. And I've started collecting images off of Instagram because while we know that many things linger long on the internet, some do not. And so I encourage you all to think of the internet and some of these places as your living archive to see what's happening culturally and story-wise. And then I'm going to move ahead to talking a little bit about the imperative for the living archive. Who is it for? And some of you won't necessarily want to do this, But if you're an older person and you have grandchildren, I really want to encourage you to think a little bit about the ways in which you have something to give to your community and to your children and grandchildren as far as a history. Because while many of us are interested in oral histories, a lot of times it's not known who's the keeper of the stories. And I say this partly because I regret very deeply that I didn't have the right kinds of questions, the right level of maturity to ask my parents about their stories until it was too close to their death. They didn't want to talk about it, they didn't remember, or they simply said, oh, that was in the past. So the work of the archive can happen in a number of ways, and it should be thought of as for the future. And I know the Institute is really mindful of this idea that the remote past or the distant past or the immediate past all are part of the living story of Iranians who live outside of Iran, but also for Iranians inside of Iran. One of the things that we're faced with is erasure, being erased from the histories of Iran, either by people leaving or by state censorship and repression of information. So the work of the archive can happen in workshops, can happen at universities, but it can also happen in collecting, people collecting and coming together. And I'm going to share with you a few of the ones that I've been doing, and I'm going to skip over that. You'll see in the film this artist, Taraneh Hamami. She and I worked on a project in 2000 called Hall of Reflections. She orchestrated most of it, but I did writing workshops with some of the members of the community who brought their photographs. And those photographs people talked about them and wrote about them, and then it became part of an exhibit called Hall of Reflections. I also organized a conference at San Jose State called Cultures of the Iranian Diaspora, something I hope we'll get to do in Canada, showcasing young artists who are doing work that is reflective of the work of the Iranian diaspora. I also collaborated with a colleague who's a playwright and a professor on adapting short stories from the collections that I worked on into staged plays. I know it sounds like a big leap, but this is archival work because what it does is it gives people the opportunity to see and hear these stories in different kinds of spaces. So these are 3 different stories. This was an adaptation of Marjan Kamali's book, Together Tea, that we did. And then I'm going to end with talking a little bit about the digital archive that I've been actively working on, which will be linked to University of Toronto. The stories that Iranian Americans or Iranian Canadians tell connect us to a longer genealogy of history and memory and also of connection and loss. And so it's really important that we do this work. This is a photo from a film called Nowruz, which you'll see in the film. I used some of it. And it was donated, the film was given to me in 2020 by an American guy who read an interview with me on CNN when shortly after Soleimani was assassinated by the Trump administration. I was being interviewed, as many Iranian scholars get interviewed only in times of crisis. I was interviewed on CNN, and it was published, and this gentleman, Peter Stein, contacted me and said, I read your piece on CNN. I'm so glad you're giving a different voice to Iranians living in the US. I had this experience as a child. We lived next door to the Iranian consulate in San Francisco, and we were great friends with the Rahnama family. And I don't know what happened to them, but my mother was commissioned by the Consul General to make this movie called Nowruz. Would you like it? Or would you like to see it? And he showed it to me on a really low quality DVD. And I asked him if he had the original print. And he said, yes, would you like it? And I said, I would love it. And so I restored it. And then I hosted a screening online. It was during the pandemic. I hosted a screening online, and before the screening, Peter said to me, I don't know what happened to the kids in that family. I haven't seen them in 60 years, and I've lost track of them. And I said, I'll help you find them. So I did some sleuthing on the internet, and I found Pune, the sister in the family, was on Facebook. And I found Kaveh on LinkedIn, and for the first time in 60 years, they're depicted in this photograph as children. They were in a Zoom space together watching the film and recounting their memories of their childhood as an Iranian family and an American family, growing up together in the city of San Francisco. And it was a great surprise, but this is the living archive. And it's like one of the great surprises is that sometimes when you open that gate of wanting to collect information, you collect information not just for the purpose of whatever you're doing, but also you're collecting information for people to remember and reconnect with their own stories and histories. So this also was a real moment for me to think a little bit about the archive of the Iranian diaspora is not just over there, and it's not just over here. It's in the spaces also between. Pune lives in Iran, Kaveh lives in France, and Peter lives in Sacramento, California. And last year, Pune came to visit her daughter, and for the first time, Peter and Pune saw each other and embraced, and we had dinner together, and it was like a wonderful, happy story of reconnecting. But you'll see in the film that I decided to use some of this archival footage because it also tells the longer arc of US-Iranian history. And I'm going to leave you with those thoughts. And remind you that the future of archives is inside our homes and in our memories, and also that it's a collaborative endeavor, that even though some of us might have more experience, we need to mobilize our communities and our peers to think a little bit about what trace do we want to leave behind for future generations. It's also really important because I know that many Iranians identify with both Iran and wherever they're living. And I think we take it for granted that those histories will always be there. And they won't. They just won't. I know from the US context, and that last example I gave you was a good one. So I think it should be a collaborative effort, and I hope it's multivocal, meaning not just one story, the story of the well-to-do who were successful, but also people who struggled. And I hope it's not exclusively nationalistic, and I hope it's poetic. And with those thoughts, I leave you, and I hope the film evokes more questions as well.
Thank you, Professor Karim, for your inspiring presentation, and I invite all of you to think about how to archive your own living life. And if you need any help, I'm here. We have a period of question and answer after the film, but for now, I invite you to join us outside for a brief period of refreshment. coffee, tea, and chatting. Please. Thank you again, Professor.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a true honor to be here today and to introduce this documentary. The Dawn is Too Far, a stories of Iranian American life. Even more special, we are privileged to have Professor Karim with us, someone whose work has given voice to stories that have too often been unheard, stories that carry both the weight of history and a strength of resilience. This is not just a documentary, it's a journey through memory, identity, and search for home. It tells the story of Iranian American in San Francisco Bay Area, a community shaped by love and loss, by struggle and reinvention. It reminds us that migration is not just about living, it's about what we take with us, what we hold on to, and how we find belonging in the place that never meant to be home. For decades, Iranian American have lived between worlds, rooted in a past they can return to, yet constantly reshaping the present they now call home. Their stories have been ignored, simplified, or only seen through the lens of the politics and conflicts. Both this film is different. It doesn't just tell a story, it makes us feel it. Through art, activism, and personal stories, it shows how a community has survived, not just by enduring hardship, by creating, by remembering, but refusing to be erased. The Dawn is Too Far is not just about the past, it's about all of us. It's about that how we carry our roots, how we weave our stories together, and how we build something new without forgetting where we came from. I invite you now to watch this remarkable documentary, to listen deeply, to reflect, and witness how migration, history, and cultural memory reshape us all. Thank you. Please.
آشتی خواهم داد، آشنا خواهم کرد، راه خواهم رفت، نور خواهم خورد، دوست خواهم داشت.
Bravo, Professor Karim. Amazing. So touching. I've been crying all along. Yeah. Happiness. Really, you bring out that sort of spirit and the triumph of spirit in Iranians who have dealt with so many difficulties, but that happiness survives. So we have a few minutes for Q&A. Could you join? Hey, hey, hey.
Hello?
Hello?
It's working now.
I was going to say, I'm glad you felt joy and happiness and a sense of triumph, because I think it's also a story tinged with sadness. And I hope the complexity, no, but it's not a defeatist story, no. So, I just wanted to point out that the archival footage, because my dear friend Mohammed is an archive lover, and you saw the footage that's archival. I think one of the great things about archival footage or archival material, it can do the heavy lifting. I didn't want to make a movie that was like, and this happened, and then 1979 happened, and then I didn't want to be explaining the story. I wanted people to be able to speak for themselves. And some of the material of historical events can be done through archival work. So some of the...
Who is it?
Yes.
Really well done.
Thank you. Thank you. And you saw the footage from that 1961 movie, which I think is interesting.
Some questions? Anyone? The lecture? The film? Yes, please.
Can people retain Iranian citizenship if they are born outside Iran, but their parents are Iranian?
Yes. You can become an Iranian citizen. When I was a child, my father could have gotten me an Iranian passport or a birth certificate. He never did. And then when the Islamic Republic came, you could only derive citizenship through your father. That has since changed, I believe.
Thank you for the good question. Other questions? Yes, Martha?
It's a very beautiful and uplifting film. I was wondering, you have the, you had the explanation practically of the title, The Dawn is Too Far, and that candle is necessary in that long night. Why was it specifically, why does it emphasize the distance of the dawn? Is there a significance to that?
Well, that poem seemed like when we were searching for a title, that poem just leaped out because Iranians in the US have been waiting for a very long time for a situation when the relationship between these two countries could be, if not normalized, better. And so I think many of us feel a sense of anticipation, hopeful, cautious optimism at moments, and then crushing disappointment. For example, after the Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. So in Persian, and Mohammed can add to this, there are many words for dawn. Dawn is an important time of day. It opens, on sunlight and the rising sun, but it also is that moment when there's still darkness. So I thought it was a good metaphorical phrase. I didn't, none of this movie was scripted. It was all filmed, and we sort of put it together. But it became sort of important to feature the two important holidays in the Iranian tradition. Shab-e Yalda, the longest night, and then the spring equinox. They're, as anybody in this room can attest, they're just beautiful benchmarks in human life. But they also can represent the poles of both hopefulness and tentativeness. So,
and in a sense that you also feature some of these people like Shawkat, who were revolutionaries, fought for a revolution, but the outcome was not what they expected. And it was really great to see his face during the women life liberty movement. And sort of, he was totally revitalized. And you could see his youthfulness in this old person's face. And in a sense is the postponement of dawn. You're almost there and then it gets delayed a little bit.
Yeah. Which Persian word is it? Sahar?
Sahar.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Karim. Thank you, Dr. Tawakkoli, for such amazing discussions and the movie. Beautiful. Thank you. You mentioned several times the word archival, and it takes you to the past, the word, and the history, the old. But at the same time, what I observed and caught from this movie and from this amazing discussion, you beautifully connected the old, the past, with present, and also beautifully this movie takes you to the future. I mean, nicely to, when we see that woman life freedom movement and the discussions, the laughters, the smiles, that togetherness. I really connect with what Dr. Tawakkoli said about, that happiness, the cheerfulness, although you're absolutely right. I mean, you can sense that, the feeling about the past, that sorrow, that, pain. But at the same time, you can sense that, amazing sense of hope. And I really wanted to thank you about that. And you mentioned about your, background in poetry.
Hold it closer, because I can't hear you.
Your background, I mean, your love for poetry. And I could really sense and see how this movie had that sense of, poetry in it, that interdisciplinary, nature of connecting so much, and especially the hope side. And I wanted to hear more about that. Is it true what I sensed? I mean, that connection of past, present, future, and that sense of connecting the sorrow.
Thank you. That's a high compliment. I guess I like to think of myself as a poet. But I also think the beauty of Iranian culture has always, to me, come through poetry. My father he loved Omar Khayyam. And as a kid, my father would pull me aside and recite, a quatrain of Khayyam. So I think, it's a really critical part of Iranian culture. And for me, the poetry of these individuals, their lives, the way their lives unfolded, is very poetic. That idea that it's neither one singular emotion nor one singular event. And it's a little bit like what Taraneh says about, the work that she does in the artwork is like people are building something and then it can be broken again. And that sort of act of making and unmaking and then remaking, I think is a testament to what I've witnessed among many, many Iranians that I've met personally as individuals, but also collectively. And this, I didn't know everybody in the movie. I met a few of them as a result of making the movie, but I knew Taraneh. I worked with her on that project, Hall of Reflections, and I knew she had to be in the movie because she was so articulate about her own poetic process as an artist.
And also poetic life. Almost every individual that you sort of focused on, they had a poetic life of some sort. And at the end, this triumph of spirit, that is, they were hopeful, it was defeated, but hope remains alive, and the poetry continues. Yeah.
I also wanted to feature art. So, people have made these movies, especially in California, about how great Iranians are, how successful they are in business, how they're titans of the Silicon Valley. I absolutely wanted to refuse that idea of America as the salvation for Iranians, because it's also been very difficult. And I came of age during the hostage crisis. So for me, my entire adult life has been shaped by the 45-year tension between Iran and the US. So I felt like it was very important to capture not just people's success, but some of their challenges and disappointments and sorrows, right? Because many of these people haven't been able to go back, or have gone back but have been uncomfortable with what they went back to. So, and I think it's very important to capture that complexity, because I think it would be dishonest for me to make a movie and say I knew what these Iranians had been through, because I haven't gone through the same thing. But I've been a witness to it, and I've also been a witness to the sort of making of this community in the Bay Area, which is really wonderful. And a lot of Iranians, when they come to the Bay Area, they get Iranian diaspora community envy, because there's, but I suspect I would have it about Toronto too.
Do you think so? No? Any other questions? Yes, please. Nagar?
Thank you, Doctor, for the wonderful talk and the wonderful movie. My question is about the second generation of immigrants, because this movie was about the first generation and those who choose to immigrate from their own country. But does the Center for the Iranian Diaspora Studies have done any research about the second generation of immigrants or not? And I have another question, because I think that the second generation of immigrants has a really hard time to just create a balance between their own roots and the destination country that they're living in, the culture of their own roots and the destination country. And my second question is about this second generation of immigrants, because when we are creating an exhibition or archive for the first generation, because they have a mutual connection with the archive and the art, so they can understand it. But what about the second generation? How we can create something for them to get to get in touch with it? Thank you.
By second generation, I'm assuming, Nagar, you're talking about people born in the countries where their parents immigrated to.
The children of the people that
Yeah.
you...
Yes, or they came to the destination country for the age of this.
Yeah. It's a very good question. And part of the reason I wanted to focus on the older generation is because I'm always worried that people don't know that story. And part of the imperative for the movie was, I'm not just speaking, I wanted the movie to speak to Iranians, but I also wanted it to speak to non-Iranians. I think one of the ways to engage the second generation is to engage them. So one of the things that I think we haven't done as a diaspora or even in communities is have young people talk to their parents, to ask questions that elicit, more generative conversation about, well, what happened, Some of it is because older generations, like, people don't like to talk about the Iran-Iraq war. People don't also like to talk about, Parviz was very open, but I can tell you there's lots of Iranians who are activists who don't want to remember or feel embarrassed or ashamed.
Suppress it.
Suppress it. So I think that, part of the thing that I was trying to sort of evoke in the talk is also that there's a way in which you can capture the attention of younger generations also by meeting them where they are. They might not know Persian. They might not have ever been to Iran, but they might also have an experience of Iran that is through their parents or through exposure to language or poetry. So I would like to see more intergenerational conversation, and I think archive projects like Taranto is a really, I think it will evoke that. It will happen organically, I'm certain. Don't you think? And then I also think one of the things that I find interesting is that young people are challenging even some of the stories and myths that Iranians tell about themselves. So the Aryan myth, if you talk to a lot of 20-year-olds, they identify more with racial categories in their own context, say in the United States, and they identify more with the experience of being marginalized people of color than they do with maybe their parents' notion of like, the Aryan myth of like Iranians are superior. I think that's a really interesting place to meet young people, is to ask them questions about what do you see in Iranian culture that's valuable, interesting, captivating. And I think it's a very complex story. I don't think that we know the answers, so I think finding ways, you and I talked a little bit about doing art. That's an incredibly valuable way to elicit some of those conversations. The art project that Taraneh did, the Hall of Reflections, was a writing workshop that I led, and she scanned the photos, and we sort of had these intergenerational conversations. And sadly, I don't know if we recorded very much of it, but it wasn't like the first time people talked amongst generations.
Thank you. Shabnam?
There are a couple of Zoom questions.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay, so Pune mentioned something, Pune Shabani, that there is a film made about Iranian Canadian diaspora artists made by the late Shaheen Parhami called Chehreha, and she shared a link to share with you and the audience if you like. I will do that later. But Susan, I'm assuming, or Suzanne, I'm not sure, is asking a question. Was there any subject or footage that you wished you had included, or you miss when you watch the movie in its edited format, I'm assuming?
Parviz had a very interesting story. Parviz had eventually had a deportation hearing, and he was threatened with deportation because somebody he had been an activist with after this period, some of you are old enough to remember Gerald Ford, somebody tried to assassinate him. There was an assassination attempt on President Gerald Ford's life. Her name was Squeaky Fromm, and she claimed that she was part of a group, and the FBI had files on a lot of those early Iranian activists. So Parviz was implicated by somebody who was in this trial, and so he wasn't a citizen, and he was threatened with deportation. And he told the story of getting a lawyer and appearing before the judge, and it was really fascinating, and I wish we could have included it. But the other part of the process of making a movie like this, which is an ensemble cast, and there's like lots of narrative threads, and you're trying to capture some arc, is that you have to leave things out in order to have some integrity. So we ended up, leaving some of the footage out. If I were going to add something in too, I might have tried to figure out how to get the story of Peter Stein, the gentleman who donated that film Nowruz, and his telling me the story of these Iranians and then finding them. But that was that's a whole other story.
The reunion.
The reunion, yeah. But I think that's kind of how you have to edit a book down sometimes too.
Please.
Thank you so much, Professor Karim. That was amazing, film. I really touched. My question is about the storytelling. How did you collect different part of this film? Because your film beautifully intertwines the profound way of political history and everyday life of people who lives in diaspora. How did you decide where to place of emphasis between political aspects and everyday life? Because sometimes these aspects can overshadow the other one. And it was interesting for me. Was there any moments you feel you lost the control between these aspects?
Yeah. Well, I'm a first-time filmmaker, so I learned a lot from the people that I worked with. The editor is the most important person. They help you find the little jewels and figure out. So I'm really grateful to have worked with somebody who, she was Japanese American, and she had a lot of sensitivity to, like, you know, things that, like I said, no, we're not going to put that in, or we wanted to show people doing things, right? So not just talking heads, which documentaries are very easy to fall into the trap of either the narrative voiceover or the talking head trap. And so we made a decision that we really wanted to make sure we showed people doing what they love to do. So theater, activism, painting, and because we picked artists, we knew that we were going to, like, try to show art, right? Which is a big part of Iranian culture, of course. I think what was difficult was to land on an idea of showing these people and their lives, but also trying to show an arc of history, right? This is about 50 years, 50 plus years of history. And I think what I wanted to show was the idea that these people's lives are influenced by bigger events. We don't live outside of history. We make it, it makes us, we remake ourselves. That idea that history presses in our lives, and we're living through a big one now, at least in the USA, that history presses in on us and we respond to it, and we also have to, you know, make decisions. And so I wanted to show that idea that this is a history made in in Iran, but also in the US. So, for example, when I got a hold of this footage of these protests in San Francisco, Parviz told me about them, and then I found out that my own university has these television archives, which were footage that was thrown into the garbage, and somebody took it out, saved it, and it became part of the archive of San Francisco State. I was like, that's a really important narrative that Iranians don't know, that Iranian students were here, were affected, and Mohammed can talk a little bit about this. They were affected by what was happening in the US and took some of that back with them to a vision about Iran. So that idea that we're not talking about two independent histories, we're talking about two interconnected histories which are part of global historical events. So I knew that was really important.
Can you get this film as a kind of living archive, as you mentioned in the lecture? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I hope so. I'd like to think it is.
Negar, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay. Thank you so much for this moving documentary. I'm sure everybody here could resonate at least with one of the stories. I did resonate with the one that the couples were far away, and I mean, it was really, sadness and happiness both together. So my question is a little bit sort of, maybe it could be considered personal, but I was wondering if in the process of making this a documentary and hearing these stories from all these beautiful people. Did it sort of change your own perspective about Iranian diasporas and how we are telling our stories, let's say? I mean, when you first started making this movie, and then what were you thinking about? How did it start? And then with the ending point and like making the documentary,
did the exercise transform you? Right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely, yes. I think it would be impossible for me not to be transformed by it. And part of the thing that I think I kind of came to this work as a person longing to connect to Iran and having not been to Iran and not having grown up speaking Persian. So I had a lot of tentativeness about how do I claim this part of myself, and at the same time, see all the ways in which it wasn't mediated for me. It wasn't possible. My parents came to the U.S. my mother in 47, my father in 46. That was an entirely different moment for me and them versus some of these other people who came at various points. How it transformed me was to really believe that you have to trust people and you have to let them trust you to tell their story. And also you have to, like in the case of making a movie, I really believe that people are capable of understanding a lot more than we sometimes believe them. So I felt like one of the things that I got a lot of energy from was the fact that these people made themselves vulnerable and trusted me, and I was going to try my very best to do right by that kind of trust. So I think it made me understand how important it is to honor the story and also to honor the voices and experiences of people who are better equipped to tell the story. And I've come to this through literature, and literature is wonderful. It's my baby. But I also feel like we need to see people's faces, hear their voices, let them speak. And that is, I think, there isn't enough of that among Iranians in particular. And it's kind of, we're drowned out by noise, by stupid headlines, recycled headlines. And so this kind of work, I think, does do a lot to make people feel seen. And I love that. I love being able to help have people look again.
Professor Karim, we have two more questions. One and second. And then.
Thank you for your magnificent movie. I have one question as an anthropologist about the fieldwork of you, Iranian communities in San Francisco. Did they watch this movie? And do you have any program to talk about them? And also, do you have any idea to remake and reproduce the similar stories about this movie? Or do you think it's important to motivate the Iranian communities to add more archives and more stories to this movie, or want to renovate and redesign other forms like this? Do you want to participate or motivate the young generation of the Iranian diaspora to think about this movie?
I think she's here to motivate us.
I want to motivate
do the same thing
yes.
in Toronto.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I think Toronto is like ripe, from what I can observe and what my colleagues here are doing. I think it's very ripe. A place that would be very generative of, look, Moniru Ravanipur did these workshops to help people write about their losses connected to the you know, the downing of the airplane and all the people who were killed. That's a good effort. That's a very important effort. But there's many more stories beyond that that I think I know Amin and my friend Nima. I'm having a senior moment. Sorry, Nima. And I also think young people have a different perspective, so absolutely you want to captivate them. And I think people born in Canada might have a different perspective than people who immigrated with as children. People like Amin and, well, I was talking about the other, Amin too, behind you. There's 2 Negars and 2 Amins, so no wonder I'm forgetting Nima. And Nima spelled backwards. That's right. Yep. So, absolutely. I don't know how to answer that except get busy.
And
Nima has something.
Nima, and then we go to you.
Professor Karim, I have a question. Do you have any plans to put it on YouTube for people to watch it?
Oh, yeah.
There's an Instagram page for it, and just for 1 minute and a 6 minute of this movie.
Yeah. I'm trying to work on a distribution plan. Because I did it under the auspices of the university, and because the Center for, I haven't said this, but the Center for Iranian Diaspora Studies will be no longer on June 30th, 2025, which is a very sad chapter. But I'm working with the University of Toronto to give over some of our recordings, and if I can't get a distributor for this in the next few months, I'm going to put it on YouTube because I want people to see it, of course. But I'm going to try, before I do that, to, I've submitted it to several film festivals. It's gotten into 2. It won an award at one, not a big award, but the Hollywood Diversity Film Festival gave a Cultural Perspective Award, and what they said was, we've never seen a film about Iranian Americans. So yes, in answer to your question. Yeah, I'm not so worried about monetizing. I'm more worried that, like, it gets its fair play at the beginning, you know? So.
Professor Nobari, do tell. Come on. Don't be bashful.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's actually not a question. It was just more of a comment. First of all, congratulations. This was really a brilliant film. Very moving and very important. And one of the things that struck me when I was watching it, because, you know, Amin and I have talked so much about the differences between the diaspora community in Toronto versus the States, particularly California. And I was thinking this film really captures this, you know, as an ethnographic kind of study or archive, right? That what's interesting is that so many of the people you interviewed were so involved in the revolution, right? In the 60s, and then also working with the other revolutionary movements in the 60s, like the Black Power movement and so on, going back to Iran. So the revolution was really the core of their kind of, you know, identity and motivation for coming to the diaspora. Whereas in Toronto, it's really quite different, right? We continue.
Escaped the revolution.
They escaped the revolution, exactly. And then we have successive waves, like we have successive waves of first-generation immigrants, right? So it's really quite a different diasporic context, and it's really interesting to think about, you know. So,
yeah. And I think that's a rich canvas on which to work, because my feeling is we should not have a sort of monolithic narrative. And, you know, I mean, one of the things about Canada is people have been admitted more regularly than in the US. That spigot got turned off before Trump, but especially under Trump. And I don't know, I mean, diasporas often benefit from that refreshing the waters, but it's complicated too. And the person in the film who's most recent is Hanif, who came in 2012. And, you know, part of the thing that I think he was able to do was kind of build on what was already here. But yeah, it's a very important point.
One comment about this, the revolutionary spirit, I mean, I characterize it as escape the revolution. One made the revolution, wanted to make the revolution. The other one escaped the revolution. But on the other hand, when you put all of them together, these various generations, they all have this revolutionary aspiration. So the revolutionary aspiration of radical social transformation, creating a place that is utopia on earth, Iran becomes this ideal place, is not too far away from, you know, is there for everyone. And you saw it very clearly in Women, Life, Liberty movement, that people of all classes, all political ideologies, all of a sudden jumped into action and got really excited.
Yeah. And there was that real moment of unity, well, briefly, I guess, before there were all these different factions, but in the diaspora. And the same could be said for the Green movement, right? There was that moment of everyone kind of coalescing around the sort of revolutionary hope, right? Or
revolutionary hope that escapes the deep factionalism and deep ideologization of various sectors of Iranian society. But there is that moment that everyone comes together regardless of their ideologies, their politics. Well, please join me. Thank Professor Karim for her outstanding lecture and gorgeous film. Really poetic, really impactful.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you for being here, because I know it's not easy to get out in this weather from California. And thank you, Dr. Tavakkoli, for hosting me and your wonderful team for all the work they did. So thanks.
And thank you all for taking the opportunity to come to campus on a family day, and also during a day that the streets of Toronto have become filled with mountain ranges of snow.
Bravo.